pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. So what does it say? One of the sins of Sodom, there were several, but one of them was abundance of bread. Well, it's not like it's immoral if you were to have a large garden per se, but if you were to use that food in a way that, number one, wasn't a blessing to humanity, and it even became something that you ate so much that it became unhealthy to you, that would have negative consequences. But it's interesting, few people probably know about this, but in the Old Testament, speaking of Israel, God prophesied what would happen to the Israelites when they went into the Canaan land. That they would go into this land of plenty, but what would happen? It says in Deuteronomy 31:20, "For when I have brought them into the land which I swore to their fathers, flowing with milk and honey, and they have eaten and filled themselves and grown fat, then they will turn to other gods and serve them and despise me and break my covenant." God had actually prophesied that what would happen is that the Israelites would go into the land of Canaan, they would have a life of ease, they would go into the promised land. When they would get there, they would eat a bunch of food and they'd actually grow to be fat. He prophesied that that would happen. So we do have this prophecy in the Bible. It was what we would call classical prophecy. It's not necessarily a last day prophecy, it was about the ancient Israelites. This was a prophecy, what would happen to Israel when they went into the Canaan land. They would eat too much and they would grow fat, but the result would be they would turn away to other gods. And so there's this connection between them, doing these different things and ultimately turning to idols. Notice what it says in Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 25 and 26. "They took fortified cities and a rich land and possessed houses full of all good things, cisterns dug out, vineyards and olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. So they ate, were filled, became fat, and delighted themselves in your great goodness." So they were enjoying all the wonderful things, all the wonderful foods, but as a result, cities and a rich land, just like it had prophesied would happen to them. Notice what we read in the next verse, in verse 26. "Nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against you and cast your law behind their backs and killed your prophets that testified against them to turn them again to you, and they committed awful blasphemies." So notice as they became comfortable, as they began to eat a lot of food, they became fat, and then they turned to other idols. And I think there's actually a connection between the gut and the brain. You say, "Chad, I don't know what you're talking about." Now, we're going to get to that in more detail when we look at the gut-brain connection. But as they became fat, as they began to live unhealthy, it affected their spirituality. And so it's interesting, in the gut-brain connection, when you see that video, what you're going to discover is that something happens that actually, it can cause depression, it can cause negative characteristics, it can cause negative repetitive behaviors to be on a high-fat diet. We'll look at that in detail when we get to the video on the gut-brain connection. But the Bible also talked about people also, in the New Testament, it says in Philippians 3, verse 19, it said, "Whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who mind or think about earthly things." So notice what the Bible says. It talks about people whose God is their belly. Food is everything to them. All they think about is food. This is something they're constantly eating. Their God is their belly. And God wants to set us free from idolatry, right? He wants to set us free from an addiction to food. So we're going to turn now to addiction in the brain. Addiction in the brain. What do we see now? I'm going to show you a video clip from our newest documentary, which is 8 Secrets to Ancient Health. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to our website, anchorpointfilms.com. You can purchase it either in a DVD or you can download it. But either way, very powerful. This is just a clip. It's an hour-and-a-half documentary in totality. So here's the video clip.
We come to the T, and the T stands for temperance.
When we look at the definition of temperance, we talk about abstaining from things that are bad for us, but also moderation in things that are good for us.
The word temperance is not something that we hear a lot in our society today, but we do hear the word addiction. One of the things that scientists have recently discovered is that there's a common pathway for addiction in the brain, and that pathway is the same whether it is for drug abuse, whether it's for alcohol, whether it's for eating disorders, or even self-mutilation behaviors like cutting, for example, also is lighting up that same addiction pathway in the brain.
One of the things that has been shown that scientists recognize that there are actual chemists who work for some of the big companies, some of the big food companies, who have discovered they are literally working to make food as tasty as possible so that it is literally addicting, where you just can't stop, as it were, right? And so what they have found is that through a combination of three things, through salt, fat, and sugar, if they can combine these just in the right equations, that they can make the food, and many times with just the right crunch factor also, by having these things mixed together, they can actually bring it to a point where you almost cannot stop doing it. You can't stop eating it, meaning, you have one bite of it and it's just so good, you have two and you have three, and by the time you might have finished a whole bag or a whole container of some food, and you know that's not good for you, you don't feel good afterward. You feel sluggish, your stomach doesn't even feel good, but it's so addictive. So we want to find a way to have food that isn't addicting. And so getting it out of the house is the best thing. Just like the cigarettes, if you leave cigarettes in the cupboard, if someone who's addicted to smoking, 9 times out of 10, they're going to go back to smoking, right? I mean, if it's sitting there and they're having a bad day. And so once again, we challenge you, get the junk food out of the house. So, and eating, if you get back to whole foods where none of them are refined, now you can put some salt on your whole foods because you can actually get too low on salt. Some people do. And so getting back to the whole foods though, you'll get to the point where once you start getting so filled with nutrition, you'll have some cravings for a while for sure. But they will begin to subside as your body just becomes packed with good nutrition. There's another substance found in many processed foods that can make people very addicted. And it's called, you may have heard of it, MSG, or monosodium glutamate. Now, monosodium glutamate has many different names, and I'll get to that in a moment. But before I share that, I want to just share a personal experience. I had an experience where I had a box of, I won't even say what it was, but a box of things that actually kind of sound healthy. They're these wheat-type crackers, and you can maybe guess what they were, and they were specifically tomato basil, and one of the things they added to them was MSG. And what I've discovered, so I begin to eat them, and I can eat a whole box of food with MSG in it, literally, and if there were more, I could keep eating. Because when the food is that tasty, it tickles my brain to the point where I can eat and eat and eat and eat and never really feel like stopping. And the scientists recognize this, they know this. And so what they do is they put these substances in our food that make it just literally, our brain becomes so excited. Some call them actually excitotoxins, that they literally become so exciting to our cells that our cells may actually die within our brains. And so it's better to get away from these things, especially if you struggle with weight, because these things are addictive. And the scientists know this, and that's why they have chemists that they fund and they pay to work in the lab to make food that we just can't stop eating. But if we get back to whole foods, you'll see, especially as we get to the full factor and as we get to the principles at the very end of this series of lectures, you're going to see a way to get away from it where you can actually overcome. Now, some of the other names for MSG, you may look, you have the word just glutamate, monosodium glutamate. Sometimes it's called yeast extract, or autolyzed yeast, or hydrolyzed protein, or hydrolyzed vegetable protein, or sodium caseinate, or calcium caseinate, or it could just be called bouillon, or broth stock, or malt extract. You say, Chad, how am I going to remember all these names? I'll tell you, you can get to the point where you don't have to know any of the names if you'll just get back to whole foods. Now, not everybody's ready for that, but the closer you get, you don't even have to read. You just pick up the cucumber and, oh, it's a cucumber, right? You pick up the apple and it's an apple, right? The closer you get back to the real food, you don't even need to worry about labels. But we will teach you a little bit more how to read labels and so forth in the final DVD. But the point is, the closer you are to the healthier foods, the natural foods, you won't have to worry. I've never heard of somebody, having an addiction or a binge on broccoli, or even apples for that matter, even though apples are so good for you. I've had 2, maybe even 3 apples at one time, but the reality is you never get to the point where, that's just too much. Whole foods, they just satiate our body. They just give us a feeling of satiety, a comfort that we've had enough and we're done. But when you're eating the unhealthy foods, you can just many times eat and eat and eat and eat. So I would challenge you, get away from these things, from the packaged foods as much as possible. Get as close as you can to the whole. Stay away from these fatty foods, the processed foods, and the MSG type substances. In this list that I just showed you, this is not a total list of MSG names. There are so many names, you can look them up on the internet. There's no point in me trying. Number one, you won't remember them all, and number two, they'll probably just keep changing the name so you don't know what it is when you finally buy it. But it's on the internet and you can look it up yourself. But I want to challenge you. The closer you get to the simple foods, you'll find the easier it is to overcome. Now, a friend of mine tells a story. Now, I actually met the individual who had this experience happen, but I heard it through a very close friend of mine who is a nurse, but he's also a pastor, of an experience an Adventist man had while he was on a plane. He was on this plane sitting next to a chemist who worked for one of the food companies here in the United States. And as they were flying on the plane together, one man asked, "Oh, what do you do?" And the man said, "Oh, I'm actually a chemist. I work to create foods. I'm paid to create foods that make people addicted so they just can't stop eating them." And the other man responded, he asked him, "What do you do?" And he said, "Well, actually, my church puts on seminars to help people overcome what you do." And the chemist turned to him and he said, "Are you a Seventh-day Adventist?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, we know about you, but there's not enough of you to make a difference." And it's interesting, it may be true that there's not enough people to get away from the junk food, from the unhealthy things, but the thing is, what if it could make a difference in my life? What if it could make a difference in your life? The world may not be changed, and that's okay. We all have freedom of choice. If people want to eat in a way where we're addicted, where upwards of almost 70% of society are overweight, that's what's going to happen naturally, and it just continues to increase as we make more and more of these addictive foods. But what if, person by person, if our lives can be changed and we could be a benefit to helping somebody else so that their life was changed, how good would you feel if somebody's life was transformed because of what has happened in your life? And the Bible even talks about how our life is changed and we are able to comfort others with the comfort wherewith we have ourselves been comforted, meaning that you have been helped and so you are able to help somebody else. As your life is changed, my hope is that you'll be able to go out and change somebody else's, or at least be a factor in changing the world around you. Now let's get back to this pathway of addiction. In the human brain, that the pathway of addiction is similar whether you're addicted to alcohol, whether you're addicted to drugs, whether you're addicted to overeating, or even if you're addicted to cutting yourself for that matter. It's all the same thing. It's all the same pathway in the brain. Sometimes we think, oh, this is my addiction and mine is so different than yours. But every human being, whether they're a Christian or non-Christian, has some area of their life that they cannot overcome without the power of Jesus Christ. Do you believe that? I believe that it's absolutely true that every human being has something in their life that they cannot overcome without the power of Christ. And it is that addiction pathway. And God wants us to be so connected to Him, that we are true overcomers. And here's the thing. One of the things that normally happens when people are addicted, they're able to transfer their addiction from, let's say they're on heroin, but then they are able to get rid of the heroin and they can just smoke marijuana now. Or someone who is an alcoholic who can give up the alcohol, but then now they're just a smoking fiend. Or the smoker who gives up the smoking, but now drinks caffeine like a fish. Right? So you see that what we're able to do as human beings is shift our addiction. Somewhat on our own steam or on our own strength, but to find true victory, true fulfillment and peace, even in trials, is something that God alone can do for us. And so this pathway is similar. So the pathway of addiction is something we want to learn to overcome. And as we get more in detail into the gut-brain connection, you'll see how if your body is receiving the adequate nutrition that it needs, the right fuel, and you're feeding your actually good bacteria, which we'll look at there, and it will feed you. And if you're living a holistic lifestyle of good exercise and good health and getting adequate amounts of vitamin D and sunshine and all of these different things in water and the right nutrition, that your body begins to flow the way it was meant to work. And as it does, you are able to overcome addiction and be connected to God in a way that you will continue to grow in the experience with Him. So we're thinking about this. And one way to have victory over addiction is have your body balanced and working properly the way it should. Now I'm going to share with you a point here, a very powerful study on water. You know, water is something that you see throughout even the Bible, that obviously we see it's what we'll be drinking in heaven, right? The water from the throne of God comes forth. And there was the river right there in the Garden of Eden. You see it there. And God's people, you see in the wilderness, they were to drink from that flinty rock. The rock brought forth water for them. That's what they were drinking in the wilderness there. And it's interesting because when you drink your water, and if your body is well hydrated, it can actually help you be healthy even in the area of weight. What do you mean? They did a study at the University of Birmingham, and all subjects were given a weight consultation. So all the people who came in, they were given a consultation. So they were talked about how to lose weight or different things like this. And one group was told to imagine being full before they ate. And another group was told to drink 500 milliliters, half a liter of water, 30 minutes before they were to eat. Now, what was the result? Well, the result was that those who used their imagination, they lost an average of about 1.76 pounds. Not bad for just simple imagination, right? I mean, it's not that much. I mean, it's not significant. But it was a little bit. They lost some weight just imagining they were full. And the second group drank a half a liter of water one half an hour before they were to eat their meal. Those who drank that water 30 minutes before their meal lost an average of 9 pounds or 4.3 kilograms. So they almost lost 10 pounds by simply drinking water a half an hour before they ate. And here's the thing, by the time they ate, it would have already been uptake, the water would have already been in their body instead of just sitting in their stomach. So it wasn't that it filled the position of the food. That's not what it was, because by that time it would have already made its way into the blood and into the body and the organs. And so what it is, their body is functioning when you're well hydrated, and that's one of the reasons that actually well not to drink with meals. It's better to not drink with meals, because when you drink with a meal, what happens is, let's say you fill up your stomach 50% with water, 50% with food, well, within a half an hour, that water is going to be gone. Not to mention the fact that it dilutes your digestive juices, and so your food doesn't digest as well, therefore you're not going to get the same amount of nutrition. But beside that, what happens is in a half an hour, that water's gone. You say, well, that's good. That means I didn't eat as much. But here's the thing. Then you're going to be hungry when? Probably in 2 hours. So you're going to eat again, and then you're going to do it again, and you drink with your meal, and as you continue to do that, you're more likely to eat more. But if you rather drink your water before the meal, 30 minutes before the meal, it will be taken up into your body will be functioning in a better manner, and you'll eat a good amount of food, and you'll just lose weight without even trying. I mean, this is powerful. When our body is functioning the way God intended, it will make addiction easier to overcome. This is just one example. Notice what we read here. Pure water, drunk some little time before and after a meal, is all that nature requires. Water is the best liquid possible to cleanse the tissues. Drink some little time before or after the meal. So notice this idea, we were given this 100 years ago. Drink before and after, but not during the meal. And it says food should not be washed down. No drink is needed with meals. The more liquid there is taken into the stomach with meals, the more difficult it is for the food to digest. So here's the thing, if you absolutely need to, you're going to choke, well, then you got to do what you got to do. But this thing, if you get in the habit of doing it before the meal, you'll get to the point where you're not even thirsty during a meal. The reason we're thirsty during meals is because we're dehydrated. We're dehydrated. But notice the hydrated person is less likely to get overweight from their meals. So you want your body functioning properly. So we're talking also, as I've already mentioned, the gut-brain connection. If we eat the way we should, we exercise the way we should, what ends up happening is, from the food that we eat, it feeds our body the right nutrition, the right neurochemicals will be taking place in the brain. They will go to the brain, we will feel better. We're going to talk more about this in detail. You say, what are you talking about? We'll go into some detail about this. The neurotransmitters will actually, some of them go from the food to the brain. And so as we do this, our body functions properly, and we don't crave like we used to. But when you're on the standard American junk food diet, your body won't be getting the adequate amount of vitamins, minerals, and micronutrients that you need. And as a result, you're going to be craving all the time. Not only will you crave food, but you're going to crave lusts. You're going to have maybe anger issues or whatever you struggle with, partly because your body's not functioning properly. So we're going to make a transition from addiction now, and we'll proceed into that more in upcoming videos. But we're going to move on to the different standard diets that many people are on today. So there's the high-fat diet. Should we go on a high-fat diet? Should we go on a high-protein diet? What about a high-carb diet? What about a low-carb diet? One of the fascinating things about all these diets is, did you know that if you go on these different diets, you know what will happen? You'll lose weight in all of them. You say, what? Well, how do we know what one is the best? Well, here's the thing. You'll lose weight on all of these because there will be calorie restrictions. Some of them, they will turn your body, like the high fat, you'll go into ketosis, which is actually kind of a toxic state for your body. And so you won't even feel like eating. You'll be kind of toxic. And so when you're toxic, you don't really feel like eating. So that's one thing with a high-fat diet. But we're going to go into each one of these and say, well, what is actually healthy? They all help you lose weight. And so people go on this diet, they go on that diet, they go on this one and that one, and they lose weight, but then they go back to it. But we're not looking to go on a diet per se. We want to know what is the best food to make our bodies function correctly. And when you're, just like the water, when you know when to drink your water and you drink it at that time, your body you just start losing weight because your body's starting to work right. Same thing with the food. If you eat the right kind of food at the right time, you can eat it as much as you want at the meal, not all day long, at the meal, and you will not be obese. It's impossible. Impossible. You'll see when we go into this. So what is it? High fat, high protein, high carb, low carb, what do we do? Well, let's start looking first at a high fat diet. So let's look at this. They did a study at Virginia Tech. So the College of Virginia Tech, they put men, college-aged, on a high-fat diet. And then they had people on just a regular standard diet, not a high-fat diet. But then they did muscle biopsies of these men. So they were looking at their muscles as they biopsied them. And one of the things they discovered is that it lowered the ability of their cells to uptake glucose. Well, what does that mean? What does that have to do with anything? Well, here's the thing. A high-fat diet, what it does is, and here's a picture of a cell. This is the outer membrane of a cell. And what happens is the cell, its normal functioning energy source is glucose, sugar. And so people think, oh, then I'll just get a candy bar, that will do it. Well, that'll give you a spike and a crash. But let's stick with the high-fat diet just for a moment. If you eat a high-fat diet, what ends up happening is your cells get a bunch of fat in them, and you become what's called lipotoxic, or you have lipotoxicity. What does that mean? Now, lipo is the word for fat, and toxic, well, you get the idea. It's fat toxic. You say, but Chad, I'm not even fat. Well, we're not talking about necessarily being fat. It's that you have all kinds of fat in your cells when you eat a high-fat diet. And what happens is, your cell needs the glucose, it needs the sugar to function properly, to get its energy. That's why after a high-fat meal, what happens is, how do you feel? You feel tired, you feel sluggish, you don't want to go for a walk, you don't want to do almost anything. Going up the stairs is a real chore after a high-fat meal, right? And what happens is this, when those cells are fatty, what happens is you need insulin to help you get glucose into your cell. So the insulin comes along, but at the same time, with all that fat in there, how is it when something's all fatty? It's all sticky and gooey, and what happens is as the glucose, the sugar, the energy, the fuel for your cells, as it comes along, it's not able many times to get into the cell. So your cells can't get the energy they need, and that's why you feel so sluggish after a high-fat meal. It also can cause depression, and we'll see that in the gut-brain connection message. And so what happens is many people go on these diets, and as they do, it ends up making them sluggish, they get tired, and it's kind of a downward spiral many times. And so this is what happens on a high-fat diet. These men, their muscles were losing the ability to in a healthy manner, uptake glucose, their energy source. So what ends up happening, you're on a high-fat diet, and as you do that, so your sugar can't get into the cells, so what happens? Well, then it sits in your bloodstream. And when it sits in your bloodstream, you have what? You have high blood sugar. And sooner or later, you might have diabetes. And so you have diabetes, and people think, oh, you got to cut back on the sugar. But this is the thing. They've done diets where they put people on very high sugar diets, and guess what happens? They don't get diabetes. But when they put them on a high-fat diet, they can't have sugar, and so what happens is they think it's a sugar problem. But it's not the sugar, it's actually the fat. So when you get on a lower-fat diet, you're able to uptake the glucose, you're able to uptake the good sugar from the good foods you eat, and you have all kinds of energy. It's amazing. And so it's interesting, because even in Bible times, they were not to eat fat of animals. That's what it said. In Leviticus chapter 7, 23 and 24, speak to the children of Israel, saying, you shall eat no fat of bull or sheep or goat, you shall in no way eat of it. They were not to eat fat. And so it is true, if you just eat fat, you can keep yourself from having high blood sugar levels. But once you get, a piece of fruit, boy, your sugar's going to spike. But if you're on a lower fat diet, your body will just absorb energy, the nutrition that it needs, and you'll feel phenomenal. It's actually well, my wife will go into that later. I better not talk about that. So let's move on from the high-fat diet, which actually is more likely to cause depression, high blood sugar levels, and you end up craving carbs because your cells are just craving to have the energy that they need, but you're feeding them something else. So let's talk about a high-protein diet. Let's transfer to this. How about that? Well, the Israelites, they had been on a more high-protein diet back in Egypt. They were eating the animals, and they were enjoying that food, and actually the wealthy people really enjoyed the high-protein diet in Egypt. We see that in our first video. And so, but the Israelites, when they were brought out of Egypt, God gave them manna, which seemed to be like a complex carbohydrate. It said it was like unto wafers with honey, something like this, right? And so it seemed to be more like a carb type something, and they were craving meat. You remember that? They were craving that, and so God gave them, He gave them what they were looking for. He gave them a bunch of quail. He gave them tons of them. And they suffered the consequence of eating them also, didn't they? They suffered the consequence. Now, let's look at a study done on a high-protein diet. A group of people, this is 6,300 people, so quite a few people. These people were age 50 plus. And they put them in three different groups. They had a high-protein group. The high-protein group had 20% of their diet from protein. Then they had a mid-range group, a medium protein group, which was 11% to 19% of their diet was from protein. The third group was a low-protein group, which would have less than 10% of their diet from protein. And somebody might be thinking, oh, that must have been horrible for those low-proteiners. They must have got sick and unhealthy. Just the opposite. They were the healthiest ones. What do we see? So the result of this study is that the high-protein group was 400% more likely to die from cancer than the low-protein group. Because what happens is when you're feeding your body so much extra protein that it doesn't need, you're feeding cells, and so your bodies are more likely to produce more cells. And well, what do you really need more cells when you're already a full-grown adult? You really don't need tons and tons of cells. No, your body's full grown. But you're feeding, so you end up feeding cancer cells. We'll get to that in just a minute. And these same people were 300% more likely to die from diabetes when they were on a high-protein diet. Isn't that interesting? So what they discovered also was that those on the plant protein did not cause the cancer that the animal protein did. Well, what was it? What was one of the factors that the scientists thought was actually causing the cancer? They believe it was IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. And IGF-1 is something that we get, and the more meat we eat, the more we get of this stuff. And what it does is it helps cells to grow and to divide. And as it helps these cells to grow, something happens. Now, if you're a cow and you're getting milk from mom, that's a wonderful thing. But if you're a full-grown adult, it can actually cause trouble. Even the cow stops drinking the milk at some point. It's not sucking on the udder for the rest of its life, right? I mean, that's just while it's trying to grow. And so and then it moves on to, they move on to a plant-based diet at some point, obviously. And so what ends up happening here is that, so you get this insulin-like growth factor. So you have this growth factor and it's helping you to grow, but then it starts to feed things like cancer. Well, some people have pointed out that they say, sugar causes more IGF-1. Well, actually, the people who eat higher carb diets, higher plant food diets, whole carbs that is, they actually have lower levels of IGF-1. Very interesting. So what do we see? I'll give you an example. These are the standard American diet eaters. They have an average BMI of 26.5, so they're overweight. The average standard American diet eater is just overweight. That's just the norm. And their IGF level is 201. Remember, higher is higher cancer rate, statistically. Well, some say, but you could become a runner or a serious exerciser and lower your IGF-1 levels. Absolutely true. Check it out. You can, runners, they're actually not overweight by and large. They're 21.6, and the BMI, the body mass index of 25 and above is overweight. So runners have a lower body mass. And their IGF-1 levels are down at 177, so they're significantly lower than a standard American diet eater. But notice vegans. Vegans in general have significantly lower levels of IGF-1, and they also have lower levels of cancer. Isn't that interesting? So getting back to this kind of food is one of the best things you can do. So we see high-fat diets. All of these diets will help you lose weight, by the way, right? But there's other things that help you lose weight too, like a good cocaine habit. I don't think there's such a thing as a good cocaine habit, but a cocaine habit can help you lose weight. If you have cancer and you go in for chemo, that can help you lose weight. But just because something helps you lose weight doesn't mean it's beneficial for your system, right? You can cut your stomach and so forth, but generally these people over years, they're going to go back and they're going to struggle with it again. And that's why we want to have our body work optimally the way it should. So what do the longest living cultures on earth eat? What kind of diets do they eat? And are they healthy? Are they slim? I mean, what is it? Obviously, if they live long, they must be quite healthy, but what do they actually eat? I'm going to show you once again a clip from our documentary, 8 Secrets to Ancient Health, and you can see who some of the longest living people in the world are. Notice with me here.
As we look at the world today, investigations have been done into current society and looking for places where people live the longest and the healthiest.
Something that caught my attention is something called the Blue Zones. It's a book written by Dan Buettner from National Geographic magazine.
Blue zones are places in the world where people not only live long lives, but they're actually healthy at these advanced ages.
Where you have people that are in the zone, the blue zone, they're living a long time. So Sardinia, the Okinawans, the Costa Ricans, or in America, the Seventh-day Adventist.
He found 5 zones in the world, and one of them is Loma Linda, California, which is a high concentration of Seventh-day Adventists.
One of the group of people that's been studied the most in modern science in this world are Seventh-day Adventists.
Scientists have wondered, why is it that these individuals have lived so much longer?
Seventh-day Adventists actually live significantly longer than any other group of people on the face of the earth.
They're the only blue zone that is increasing in longevity.
So they started doing studies to look at that, and there's been a number of studies, for instance, done on Seventh-day Adventists here in America, sponsored by the U.S. government and other groups, to unlock that question. The Adventist mortality study showed that Adventists had death rates from all cancers that was 60% lower for Adventist men and 76% lower for Adventist women. Lung cancer, 21% lower. Colorectal cancer, 62% lower. Breast cancer, 85% lower.
The basis for this longevity, this quality of life, is the lifestyle changes.
They have less heart disease, less cancer.
From the time I was 75 until I was 95, I assisted cardiac surgeons in the Los Angeles area. And I quit assisting in cardiac surgery because I wanted to quit while I was still able to make that decision. In other words, my problems of my advanced years would not make me quit. But the fact is, I could do cardiac surgery today.
They actually have a higher quality of life, and if they follow the health principles that they know of, they will live on average 15 years longer than people living next door to them.
So the Adventist mortality study really woke people up. They said, wow, that is significant. 60, 70% lower. We need to look even closer.
Well, they're the most likely to reach the age of 100 and reach it with a health of mind that's still there, and still be able to do a lot of things.
And we're finding that when people embrace this, regardless of ethnicity, genetic background, we're finding that we're finding longevity, more years, and more life in the years.
When we look at this population of Adventists, we note that they have 8 lifestyle choices. These 8 lifestyle principles have been summed up in an acronym known as New Start.
And when you talk about the diseases that threaten Americans, you don't think about cholera or malaria or typhoid. You think about breast cancer, colon cancer, strokes, heart attacks. These are the things that Americans fear. And the scientific research clearly shows that the rich Western diet is at the heart of all these diseases.
Let's look at 2 of the killer diseases in America today, diabetes and high blood pressure.
Adult onset diabetes. We don't call it adult onset diabetes anymore. You know why? Because we're seeing it in children. We call it type 2 diabetes now. We've got an epidemic. Believe me, you don't want diabetes. It's the #1 cause of amputation, the #1 cause of kidney disease, and #1 cause of blindness.
In the most recent data, when they look at Seventh-day Adventists, they find some are eating very similar to the general American population. We would call them omnivores. They're eating quite a bit of meat and milk, eggs, cheese. They're the reference group, if you will.
Not all Adventists live healthy, so you have the ones that live healthy and the ones that don't. And so you can study them as a subgroup.
If you look then at those who start getting away from those animal products, they're eating them very seldom, you find that they only have maybe 60% of the risk of having high blood pressure or diabetes. You move to those who've gotten rid of the poultry and the red meat. They're just having fish and dairy products and vegetarian sources of nutrition. They're cutting their risk roughly in half. It continues to go down until you get to the vegans among the Seventh-day Adventists.
Again, totally related to what they ate. The vegans had much less problems with blood pressure.
Those individuals have only 1/5 the likelihood of having diabetes and high blood pressure.
Now it's interesting, isn't it, that the longest living cultures on the planet are actually high carb eaters. So many people are immediately thinking, no, that's impossible. That cannot be. We all know carbs make you fat. We all know carbs make you unhealthy. We all know it causes your blood sugar to spike. Not actually true. What makes it spike is if you're eating junk carbs, you're drinking Coca-Cola, and you're eating Twinkies and those kind of things, for sure. You know, I mean, that's not, nobody's saying, you know, the longest living people in the world, they have largely diets of Twinkies, right? No. We're talking about whole carbs in their whole form, not in their refined form, not taking the nutrition out of something and leaving behind sugar, not at all. We're talking about whole carbs. Now, we're going to get into this in a minute. Before we look at that, let's look at the negative side of carbs. Right here, 95% of the grains that are eaten in America are refined. And so what that means is there's 3 parts of them, of something like the whole wheat anyway. There's the wheat, the germ, and the endosperm. And they have taken away the wheat and the germ, and they left the starchy part behind, and that causes spikes in the blood sugar. And people who eat those consistently, it's not healthy for them. And so people look at this and they say, look, you have an unhealthier lifestyle if you eat a bunch of carbs like that. And so then they say it might even be bad for your brain. And so they say, so whole wheat is bad for you. No, it was kind of a bait and switch there, right? Refined carbs are bad for you, so you shouldn't eat, apples. No. These are 2 very, very different things. Actually, one side is healthy, very healthy, and the other side can be detrimental to your health. But we'll get into that in just a moment. So what about refined grains? Are they any good for you? You say, well, let's look at the Asians. They eat a whole lot of refined rice. And they did a study in South Korea. And what they discovered is that women in South Korea, for every daily serving of white rice they ate, it increased their breast cancer rates by 19%, almost 20%, almost a fifth. And so you say, well, that's not good, so we shouldn't eat rice. Okay, good to know that. No, that's not what I said. I said, what kind of rice? White rice. But they found just the opposite, that eating whole grain brown rice actually lowered the chances that they would get breast cancer in the first place. So it was even lower with the brown rice, but it increases the rates with refined. You see, God made things in their perfect form, and the idea, when we take them apart, well, God didn't mean for us to break them asunder, right? What God has joined together, let not man put asunder. I know that's about marriage, not about brown rice, but the point is true. God made these things, and we can eat them the way He made it, and actually can lower our cancer levels. So you can remove the white rice, bring in the brown rice. After a while, you'll like it even more. After a while, I grew up just eating white bread, and almost never in my life had brown bread, hardly ever. And then I changed over, and now the idea of that old pasty stuff, it's not even enjoyable. Your taste buds will change. Let's go forward. They did a study, Harvard did a study. You said, but grains are bad anyway. You know, they have gluten and they're bad for you and you die younger and surely it can't be good for you. Let's find out. Let's actually do a study. Rather than looking at a study about white flour and then saying you'll get, your brain will be destroyed because you eat white things. Let's see what actually happens when we look at real science and say, let's not bait and switch with white things to whole grain. Let's find out actually whole grain itself with a study. Harvard did a study on 118,000 people, so a large study. And what they discovered was people who eat more whole grains live, guess what? Longer. People who eat whole grains live longer. Well, what are those whole grains? It couldn't be wheat. Surely that would kill you, right? Wrong. Whole wheat itself actually helps you to live longer. Science shows, I know the internet won't tell you this in general, but science actually shows that gluten is good for the guts of the majority of people, probably around 97, 98% of people. The 2 people who have 2 out of 100 who have celiac or they have gluten intolerance, it's not good for them to eat. If you're allergic to peanuts, don't eat them. But they won't kill other people, right? Same thing with wheat. If you're allergic to it, well, then it must not be good. But the craze of gluten-free, just because something's gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy, Lard is gluten-free, right? Soda is gluten-free. It doesn't make it healthy because it's gluten-free, right? And so let's think about this. But whole grains actually increase longevity. This is what the science actually shows, contrary to popular opinion, not popular science. Popular science shows the truth. So let's go forward. Did you know by eating the whole grains, whether it's whole grains, it doesn't even just have to be whole grains, but whole fruits, whole vegetables, they're filled with fiber and they help things move along a little bit. They make you regular. They help you go to the bathroom, especially if you drink adequate amounts of water while you're not eating. What it'll help do is it'll get things flowing along. And I just say that because I know a lot of people struggle with constipation. It's one of the most common problems people have, and it's because of what they eat. They eat food with no fiber, and so what they have is like a big chunk of paste in there. And it's really hard to move that kind of stuff. But when you have fiber, it'll be smooth flowing, and you'll have very little trouble. If you drink adequate water and you're just eating whole plant-based foods, you won't have almost any trouble in general. You got to exercise too. So notice what we read here. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. These foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, are the most healthful and nourishing. They impart a strength, a power of endurance, and a vigor of intellect that are not afforded by a more complex and stimulating diet. So whole foods are the best thing for you. And you say, Chad, that's not true. You can actually be strong on just plant-based foods. You may have heard of Patrick Baboumian. This man, he lives in Germany, and this man broke the world record by carrying something like 1,250 pounds, 33 feet. He dropped it to the ground and he yelled, "Vegan power." This man broke the world record of carrying something that heavy, that long, and dropping it. And the man is totally plant-based. Now, I'm not saying you can't be strong on meat. Surely you can. There's no question. You don't have to be skinny like me to be plant-based. You can be much bigger if you want to, take a bunch of protein in. But in general, you can be whatever size you want. As a meat eater, as a plant-based eater, it's just much easier to stay slender on a plant-based diet. And so now, what do? So let's go forward. What about fruit? Everybody knows fruit makes you fat, right? What does the science actually show? Remember, there's all kinds of things you'll read on the internet. They'll show a picture of a banana. You'll be flipping through a webpage, and it says, "Don't eat this if you don't want to, if you want to lose weight. Don't eat a banana. Oh, that'll make you fat." Well, what does the science show? I know there's opinions out there, but what does science show? Let's look at this, fruit and weight. A review was done in Critical Reviews in Food and Science Nutrition. So a scientific review looking at 17 different studies investigating fruit consumption and long-term weight. So, and you've got to be thinking, man, I've been on the internet, I've read the books, and I know everybody who eats fruit, they're just, big, round as can be, right? What did they find out after looking at 17 studies on fruit consumption? They discovered, what about dried fruit? They looked at dried fruit and whole ripe fruit. You know what they discovered? They discovered that it reduced long-term weight gain. Even dried fruit. So dried fruit and whole fruit actually reduce long-term weight gain. You'll be slim. You cannot become large on fruit. It's impossible, and I'll show you why. When you watch the full factor, it will absolutely astound you. You'll see it. It'll make perfect sense. Don't take my word for it. Come back and you'll see it for yourself. But it is just very clear. You cannot become overweight with fruit. It will never, ever, ever happen. Don't take my word. Come back and check it out. So let's think about this. You say, I'm not so sure about that. You got to come back and check it out. Check out the full factor. And so, well, what about Chad? But I've heard gluten. You +got to go gluten-free. You got to go gluten-free. That's what's healthy. Well, remember, if you are actually allergic, well, then maybe so. But for 90+% of the people that are not allergic, gluten's actually good for them. And I was reading a book about the gut-brain connection, and these scientists who wrote the book, they actually believe that one of the reasons people are becoming gluten insensitive or have celiac is not because there's anything that different than the last 100 years. It's not that different unless it's GMO potentially, but it's not that different in the last 100 years. What is different is our gut. Through cesarean sections, we don't have near as many microbes that help us digest as we used to. Through having shots, we go to the doctor and we end up having different shots that kill off our microbes. And as we do, we don't have nearly as many of the microbes that help us digest. And so it actually seems to be more of an issue, not of the wheat's fault, but of our own bodies that have been destroyed through various means. So whether it's C-section, whether it's taking, different antibiotics and so forth, these things can negatively impact. And there are other environmental contaminants that can cause us to have these trouble. That seems to be more of the case than the fact it hasn't really changed that much over the last 100 years. So, other than GMO, by the way. Why do people lose weight on a gluten-free diet? Well, largely because of what they put on the bread. Things like meat, mayo, cheese, lots of nut butter, very calorie-dense foods. But also going gluten-free stops you from eating most cookies, cakes, and nearly all packaged junk foods. Now really, just getting back to whole foods, healthy foods, listen, it's not the gluten. Gluten, unless you're gluten intolerant, or maybe you have gluten sensitivity, but for 90+% of people, it's actually good for us. And so we're going to see that I eat plenty of gluten, I stay thin, I stay trim, stay healthy, and you'll see if you don't have an intolerance or a celiac disease, you actually should be fine on it. It actually should be good for you, especially when you're getting it in more of a whole form, meaning whole wheat, you get whole oat groats, these kinds of things. So let's go forward. Let's think about this. What about cultures of longevity? We already talked about this, but they eat, on average, you have the Okinawans, you have the Sardinians, you have the Seventh-day Adventists. And these cultures, the longest living groups of people in the world, how much of their diet do they get from carbs? Are they all low-carb eaters? They eat 50 to 80% of their diet from carbs. Upwards of 80% of their diet from carbs, and they're the longest living groups of people. People who eat high protein or high animal food diets live shorter. They don't live as long lives. So how could it be? How could all the internet be wrong? Well, not all the internet is wrong. It's just these opinions floating around. But the reality is, when you look at it, people who feel healthy, in general, they're trim and fit, they're typically higher carb eaters. But once again, you hear the word carb, and what do you think of? You think of a Slurpee. You think of a Twinkie. You think of a donut. You think of a potato chip. A potato chip, by the way, is hardly a carb. A potato chip is upwards of almost 50% fat. That's not a carb. It's extremely high fat because they put a bunch of oil in it. That's not even a carb. And so we're talking about things that are whole carbs, not refined things, not white bread, not white rice, not, white this or that or pasta. We're talking about whole grain. You can get whole grain pasta. You get whole grain bread, brown rice or the black rice, or the wild rice or all these different things. These things are beneficial, whereas refined foods, eat food rather than refined, eat it the way God made it. It's so much better for you. But you may be thinking, Chad, eating more plants? I mean, you're not going to get enough protein. Now, we already discovered low protein diet helps you have less cancer and live longer. But where does a plant-based eater get its protein? I'm going to show you another clip from our documentary, 8 Secrets to Ancient Health.
They'll say, Dr. Bibbins, it seems like what you're talking about here is having a plant-based diet. And actually, an interesting question they'll often say is, they'll go, well, but how do you get enough protein?
I went to a plant-based diet about 10 months ago, and I have seen a huge change, and I have never felt better. It's completely transformed my life, so much so that after 2 or 3 weeks of trying a plant-based diet and really feeling awesome, my husband said, I want to do what you're doing.
So my wife started doing this before I did, and I didn't follow what she was doing. I kind of did my own thing, and that got to be a little difficult just because we were both eating so differently at meals.
At first he was very resistant and going, I'm not going to do that. I'm a meat and potatoes guy. I believe in this Western diet. This is what I was raised in. It'll be fine. And then he saw how great I felt, and he said, that's it. That's all the convincing that I need.
4 weeks in, my body, it was very strange. My body started basically just pushing out the toxins, and my back completely broke out. So it's pretty crazy how your body reacts and gets rid of the things that it figures out it really doesn't need.
After about 3 weeks of doing it, my husband saw a huge difference in me. He didn't want to do it with me because he said, it's too hard, it's too much, I like to work out, I need my protein, where am I going to get my protein, which is the biggest misconception.
And I would just refer them to the gorilla. What does the gorilla eat? Look at his muscles and then go see what he eats.
Where does the cow we eat get his or her protein? And the answer, of course, is we get adequate protein from plants.
By the government's own admission, depending on your sex and weight, they say you need between 45 and 54 grams of protein a day as a recommended minimum. The average plant-based protein intake, that is a person who's not eating any animal products at all on a plant-based diet, they're getting about 85 grams of protein a day.
So, how do we get our protein? We get it from plants, just like the animals that we eat. Well, I don't eat them anymore. I used to. I grew up eating them. Just like the animals that people eat, that's where they get their protein. Where does a cow get his protein? Right? He gets it from the plants that he eats. He gets it from the grass. There is protein in all the whole foods that you eat, even in fruit. They all have amino acids, and your body needs to break down the protein anyway and then rebuild it as protein. So it breaks it down to amino acids, builds it back up into protein. And you get that. And people say, but don't you have to do combinations of making sure you get this amino acid with this, and it's really complex? Not at all. That was old science from the 70s. We now know that's not even true. That as long as you eat a diversity of plant foods, you have nothing to worry about as far as protein goes. You get ample protein from plant foods as long as you're not eating refined junk. If you're eating whole plant foods and a diversity of it, you can eat, greens, you can eat beans, you can eat squash, you can eat yams, you can have some nuts in your diet, you can have whole grains and all these different things. As you eat these things, you eat those in a diversity of them and change it up. Don't go eating just one thing all the time. Don't just eat, apples, right? I mean, a mono diet. Don't play those games. Eat healthy food and a diversity of it, and you'll find a massive, massive benefit to your health. Your mind will become clearer. It begins to just transform your life. It's transformed mine. I'll tell you, I was one of the least likely people to ever try something like this. I thought I would never do this, but I'll tell you, when I tried it, I went off to a school, and they actually, that's the meal plan they had, and I tried it, thought it was crazy. I felt so good. My mind began to change. My joint pain began to go away. On so many levels, I felt better, and I thought, man, I'm so glad that I tried this. Went back to the meat again a couple times and just didn't feel good. And I decided, wow, that really does make a difference. I had no idea that it would have made that big of a difference. And I've seen people, their lives just completely changed by it. You know, reversing diabetes. This same diet reverses heart disease. It is something that is transforming to people. Your arteries can be almost completely clogged, 90%, but you can reverse it through a plant-based diet. This is the only diet that has been proven to do that. Totally transforming to your life. So I want to make a few challenges to you before we go. What are those challenges? Well, try drinking a half an hour before a meal, half a liter. Try drinking a half a liter a half an hour before your meal, right? Quite simple. Half a liter, half hour before. And then you can drink, probably an hour after, you can drink more water. But if you get in the habit of doing that and you hydrate yourself apart from meals, after a while you get totally used to it. You won't even feel like drinking with meals. And when you do, you'll feel bloated. You'll feel like, oh, I can't believe I ever used to do that, right? Because you'll feel so much better when you don't. And you'll just lose weight without even trying. You don't even have to exercise for that. You just drink before your meal, your body starts functioning properly. So my challenge at the end of this message, number one, is to try drinking a half an hour before your meal. Another challenge I want to make is that you try to sleep early. We talk about it in these DVDs. I didn't talk about it in this message, but I want to challenge you to try to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, and preferably getting to bed closer to 9 to 10 o'clock. The later at night, you're not going to feel as good, and you're going to be more likely to eat junk food because of your hormones. And for those of you who are overweight, you can learn over time. We're going to work you into, if you can, 2 meals a day. If you can't do it, that's fine, but you'll actually feel much better if you do, eating early, breakfast, and a later lunch, and you call it good after time. At first, you'll feel like, this is impossible. I can never do this. Oh, it feels terrible. I'm so hungry. But after a while, the hunger goes away. Your body gets used to whatever you tell it to get used to. If you're used to eating all day, your body's used to it. You try quitting, and your body just craves, man, I got to eat all day. But after a while, your body gets used to it, and then once it gets all that nutrition that it needs, it feels so good. You think, man, I don't want to taint this. I don't want to mess this up. And you go forward. Just like our verse for this seminar goes, it says that He satisfies our mouth with good things, so that our youth is renewed like the eagles. So make small changes here and there, and as you make those small changes, over time, they're going to add up to be very big changes, and you'll look back and say, man, I can't believe I was ever right there. But if you're willing to go forward, but you have to be willing to make progressive, incremental changes, and as you do, as your life changes, you'll be so happy that it did. So give it a try, go forward, and I'll tell you what, if right now you're thinking, we're going to make this challenge again, but I want to challenge you. Begin to think, do you have some junk food in your house that is going to be no good to your system and you need to go just get rid of it? Something to think about, just going and throwing it away. But before we go, let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for science. Lord, we recognize you gave us certain food in the Bible, and the closer we get, even to the very beginning diet, the original diet, we see that the longest living people in the Bible, they were plant-based eaters. We go down to right now on earth, and the longest living people today are plant-based eaters. We recognize we don't get to go to heaven because we eat plant-based. We're not talking about that. But Father, you gave us these things to be a blessing, to enhance our health, to reverse disease, so that our youth would be renewed like the eagles. And my prayer is that you would strengthen us, that we would be willing to take a step in your direction, and that you would be right there to give us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Draw us near to you, we pray, in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that you'll have a lot of questions, but I'd just like to say what a lot of good information. Did you know about the gut-brain connection? As I listened to the video, I thought to myself, I see myself as a fairly healthy person, but after listening to the video, I have to make a lot of changes in my life too. So I hope that the information that you've had this evening will literally drive you to the kitchen after we've finished to start throwing out all those things that are not good for us. Do you know, when the psalmist David says that we're wonderfully and fearfully made. He was making a very, very valid point here. And for us as Adventists, we should be the healthiest people on this planet. As we've seen, there's some who are very healthy. But we should give God thanks that he has favored us in such a way that he has given us all the information in scriptures and also through the various professionals in our church. So really, we don't have any excuse at all. And of course, I'm sure that perhaps some of you have never ever made this connection between food, the addiction of food, and the brain. Because when we think about addiction, when we hear the word addiction, the first thing that comes to our mind is drugs. But it's much more than that. We can be addicted to anything. And so if we look at what the word addiction means, it is actually derived from the Latin term enslaved by or bound to. And so that's what addiction is. You're bound to, you're enslaved by that food or that habit, because it doesn't have to be food, it doesn't have to be drugs, it could be shopping, it could be anything. And so here we are then. We get to the, when someone is addicted, one gets to the point where you lose control over the use of that food or whatever it is. And you become so addicted that it's very difficult to change, because when we become addicted to whether it's a substance, whether it's food, addiction actually changes the brain. And it does so by subverting the way the brain registers pleasure, and then by corrupting other normal drives such as learning and motivation. So although breaking an addiction is difficult, it can actually be done. So when we think of the various foods and the damage that eating unhealthily can do to us, I think that as a people, we need to understand now that we don't have any excuses at all. We can't say that we're ignorant. All the information has been provided. And so what we need to be doing now is not asking questions. It's not reading more books. It's about making those changes, take action, making those changes in our lives, because the Bible tells us that our bodies are the temple of the living God. And if we defile the temple of God, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And we can see that health is dimensional. It's physical, it's spiritual, it's social, it's emotional, and it's mental. And so as the speaker was saying, if you violate these laws, right, it's going to affect your spirituality. And there's certain texts that were brought out that evidence this, that the people of Israel, because they disobeyed God, they went after the foods that are unhealthy. It affected their spiritual lives. And the same thing will happen to us today. So I won't say any more, because I'm sure perhaps you have lots of questions to ask. So let's have the first question, please. And can you make them relevant to this discussion, this topic, please?
Okay, the first question is, what are some of the things you can do to deal with cravings?
Okay, that's a very good question, because when you're addicted, that's what it is, a craving. So I once heard Dr. Chili said something I thought was really quite amusing, but it made a lot of sense. You know, if you have a craving for chocolate, for example, you know, why don't you just have an apple? Yeah, and I think you have to make the conscious decision to know, well, look, I'm craving for this, and I just need to change this. So rather than take the unhealthy food, why not take something healthy? Apples are sweet, bananas are sweet. So if you have a craving, then that's one thing you could do. Thank you. Another question?
Is brown sugar healthier than white sugar?
Well, of course it is, because white sugar is refined sugar, isn't it? Just like how white flour is refined. Then if you must use sugar, then obviously brown sugar where nothing has been, and it's not just the pale brown sugar, very dark brown sugar where nothing has been extracted. So you're better off using that.
Okay, next question. How much fluid should one drink, especially if one is retaining water? And if one is retaining water, shouldn't drinking water be reduced?
Oh, that's an interesting question. For the question that we need to ask is, why is that person retaining fluid? So that there are some conditions whereby people do retain fluid, and you'll find the doctor will put them on medication to get rid of the fluid. But you need to look at what's happening. Why is it that you're retaining fluid? But we need to still drink a lot of water, because whatever is happening is just flushes out all the toxins and the various things that might be affecting us.
Okay, next question. I would like to know about food that grow underground, such as potatoes, yam, dashin, etc. What is the impact on the body?
Okay, those foods are really very good foods for you because they're packed with fiber, absolute fiber. And as the speaker said about the importance of fiber, it's important that we have a lot of fiber because, and we can't, we should make sure we don't have too much fiber as well. But yams and potatoes and dashins, they're good because they have a lot of fiber. It helps that people who tend to get constipated are those people who don't have enough fiber in their diet. And therefore, those kind of foods actually allow you to be not constipated.
Okay.
So those are really good foods, and they're good carbohydrates as well.
Okay, this person would like to know, is it true that white potatoes spike your blood sugar?
I have not heard that because here again, the potato, whether it's white or whether it's orange, whatever color it is, it's a good carbohydrate, so it shouldn't.
Okay, the videos suggest that a high-protein diet is not advisable for endurance training. It is recommended that you have a high-protein diet to get the amino acids. Therefore, what's the alternative?
So it's saying here that the video actually suggests that a high-protein diet is not advisable for the reasons that were stated for endurance training. It is recommended that you have a high-protein diet to get the amino acids. No, you don't have to get a high-protein diet to have the amino acids, because as the presenter said, that we can get those same amino acids in the plant-based foods that we have. So I would suggest that that one eats the plant-based foods.
Okay. Can being vegan reduce or eliminate acid reflux or GERD?
I don't know that if being a vegan will do that, because here again, with acid reflux, it's about your diet. It's what's happening in your gut. So as the presenter stated, that the problem is actually in the gut. And if we have a healthy gut, then it will make a lot of difference to us. So I don't think being a vegan, because there's some people who are vegans, and they're not necessarily healthy. Because they might still not be eating the right foods. It's not just about not eating meat or dairy products. It's about having a healthy plant-based diet.
Okay. In order to have 2 meals a day, what is the recommended time to have breakfast?
Well, that's really up to the individual. I mean, if you're going to have, I have 2 meals a day, so I normally will have breakfast about 9 o'clock. And so it's really up to you what time you'd like to have, but make sure that's a very good breakfast. As the saying is that we should breakfast like a king and lunch like a prince and supper like a pauper. So if we're advocating 2 meals a day, then anywhere between, if you're going to work and you have to start early, then obviously you'll need to have an early breakfast. But make sure that's a really healthy breakfast with a lot of energy, good carbohydrates to keep you through until the next meal.
Okay, this person would like to know, do you recommend soya milk based on the studies and researches you've read?
Well, I know that soya has had a lot of bad press. That I personally use soya milk as well, but soya has had a lot of bad press about estrogens. But the estrogens that you find in soya are phytoestrogens. They are plant estrogens, and they're good for you. So I personally don't think that there's a problem with having soya because of what has been said in terms of estrogens. But as I said, these are phytoestrogens, which are plant-based, and they're not harmful at all.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I'm going to break it down into two sections. The first section is, why do people also get overweight on a vegan diet? And the second part of the question is, do we classify honey as an animal base?
So why do people get overweight on a vegan diet? That tells me that they're still not eating healthily, because as far as the presenter was saying earlier on, that you can be unhealthy even being a vegan. I remember when I was at university, and there's this colleague, a student, and he was a vegan, but he didn't look anything like being healthy at all. So again, it goes back to your diet, because some people are just vegans because they don't believe in killing animals, and the health part of it is actually non-existent. So even being a vegan, you can be overweight if you're not having a healthy plant-based diet. Now, do we classify honey as an animal base? Well, I've heard this. I've met vegans who don't eat honey because they classify it as animal product. I still don't know what the answer is on that, but I do have honey. I don't see it as an animal product, but that is debatable.
Okay, the next question. Is eating white rice with lots of vegetables healthy?
Forget the white rice and just eat the vegetables. Believe me, white rice is unhealthy, as was stated earlier on in the video. So even if you have it with vegetables, it's still unhealthy. So why not just have the brown rice or the quinoa, for example? Any more questions?
Yes, in terms of the next question, this person is asking, I stool frequently each time I eat coconut and tiger nuts. Does it mean I'm allergic to coconut and tiger nuts?
When you say you stool frequently, you're meaning, yes, that's a healthy thing. Yeah, because in fact we should go not just once a day, but 2 or 3 times a day. So that's a healthy thing. I don't think it means that you are allergic to those nuts.
I think I once heard that every time you eat, you should visit the toilet.
You have to be, that's how regular it should be, yeah. So that person is doing very well on coconut and tiger nuts. Any more questions?
What steps can one take to change their thinking in order to implement dietary changes that may be healthier, particularly when they enjoy foods that are classified as less healthy?
Okay, that is a good question, because to change we must change, and it's not always easy to change, because when we have developed bad habits over the years, very, very difficult to change. And I think one has to make a conscious effort and say to yourself, well, after listening to this video this evening, I need to make changes in my life, but it's not easy. And what I'd like to say is this. I mean, there's some people, for me, I can say to myself tonight, okay, I'm not touching another chocolate for the next however months, and I can do that. But for some people, it's very difficult. And this is where I think that we need to get down on our knees and ask God to help us to break that habit, because sometimes we cannot do it of ourselves. It has to be in divine intervention, believe me. Said, Lord, this is a problem that I'm having. I know somebody who had a problem with smoking and literally had to say to the Lord, I need to be rid of this habit, and ask God, to take away the desire. If you have a desire for certain foods, Lord, please take away the taste of this food. I really want to be healthy. And so it calls for a lot of self-control. But as I say, we cannot do it of ourselves. We need to ask God to help us to break such habits.
Okay, next question. Is hybridized wheat good for us?
I should think not. I think meat in any form is not good for us, because don't forget, the Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 2.
Sorry, Sister Leslene, it was hybridized wheat.
Oh, wheat. Oh,
wheat,
sorry, I thought you said meat.
Not meat.
Pardon.
It's wheat. That's okay.
Pardon. No, and I think that's what's causing a lot of wheat intolerance today. Yeah, and so the kind of wheat that we should be eating is spelt. That's a very good wheat. Yeah. So a lot of the gut problems that people are having now is as a result of that.
Okay, next question. What about bulgur as a healthy alternative to rice?
Bulgur wheat?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I don't know much about bulgur wheat, but I think it probably would be a better alternative to white rice, I would say, white rice. I need to look up more about bulgur wheat. I don't know an awful lot, but if you're talking about white rice, then I'm sure it would be better than eating white rice. Any more questions?
Just check in.
Okay.
1 second. The presenter said eating fruits will reduce weight in the long term. Others have said we should limit the amount we take in and not have smoothies. So is having 3 types of fruits in the morning good?
Yes, I personally don't see anything wrong with having 3 types of fruit in the morning. If you want to have a banana, an apple, and some grapes, that's okay. When it comes to smoothies, apparently, you shouldn't have too many smoothies because you're having far too much fiber, and there is a limit on the amount of fiber that we should have. And if you're having smoothies every day, you're having far too much fiber, which is not good. And because what's happening is when you have smoothies, the digestion takes place almost immediately. We don't have, it's like when you eat a fruit, it has to go through the whole process where it's broken down by the various enzymes in the mouth and the stomach, etc. But when we have smoothies, it just literally goes in and is absorbed fairly quickly into the bloodstream. But certainly because of the high content of fiber in fruits, then one shouldn't be having too many smoothies.
Okay, next question. Organic foods and ancient grains, etc., are more expensive than others. Therefore, what food choices can people make if they are on low incomes?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, organic foods are much better, and ancient grains, and you're right, they're much more expensive. And people in low incomes must find it very difficult. So what I would suggest is that really they do the best that they can on the foods that are not organic, the inorganic foods, but make sure that they have the good carbohydrates, nuts, and not too many proteins. But one can also cut down on other things, so if you spend a lot of money on, say, clothes or something, perhaps you might just want to cut down on that, or even cut down on some of the junk foods, because some people on lower incomes, that's what they gravitate to junk food. So cut down on those foods. And you might be able to have more, if you can't afford the organic, at least have the healthier choices like your plants, your vegetables, or your plant-based, your good carbohydrates and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Are those all the questions?
This is the final question. Is basmati rice any healthier than normal white rice?
Well, basmati rice is white, but and it's also brown. I use brown basmati, so why not switch from the white basmati to the brown basmati, which is healthier?
Okay, Sister Leslene, thank you so much. That's the last of our questions.
Well, thank you so much, and I just want to say thank you to all our viewers and listeners. And I'd just like to leave a few points with you. And I'm just hoping and praying that all of us will take up the challenge that was offered to us in that video this evening. Start drinking more water. But what's so important is that, God is our creator, and He made us, and He knew what was best for man. And that's why in the book of Genesis, after He had created man, He then told us what was best to eat. And He said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and the birds of the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, and everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So God knew what was best for us, and He expects us to obey Him. And we saw when Israel disobeyed God, they craved after all the wrong foods. It affected their spiritual lives. And in the same way, our spiritual lives are going to be affected. And indeed, the Bible says that God wishes above all things that you and I should prosper and be in good health. So on that note, may I just say thank you very much. And I pray and hope that we will take on board what we have learned, not just today, but in the other programs that the Health Ministry's department has put on, and those to come as well. Because when Christ comes, we cannot say we don't know. We can't cry ignorance. And this body of ours, He has given to us to look after, and we should not abuse it in any way at all. So I pray that God will be with us. And, if we're struggling with being healthy, if we're struggling with any addiction at all, let us get on our knees and say, look, Lord, I just can't do this on my own, but I know that I can do all things through You, because You will give me the strength to do so. Thank you very much. And I wish you, Sabbath is not finished yet. Please continue to enjoy the Sabbath. May God bless you.
King of kings, majesty, God of heaven, living in me, gentle Savior, closest friend, strong deliverer, beginning and end, all within me cries out in praise, Your Majesty. I can but bow, I lay my all before You now, in royal robes
Jesus sits upon the throne. He still reigns. Kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall. He still reigns. He's the ruler of them all. He still reigns. Hallelujah. Jesus reigns forever. He's the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He still reigns. God still reigns. From age to age, He's still the same. He's still